skills. My name is Chloe Ellis. I work for RBC Royal Bank, but my longtime career has been in public speaking with varying engagements, whether it has been literally in front of a camera or it has been in front of an auditorium of a few thousand people. Everybody has their own presentation style, and that is a wonderful thing to celebrate. And today we're going to be going through some tips and techniques that I use that I think will be a refresher for some and might be mind-blowing for others. So I welcome you to suspend your disbelief today and join us on our journey. Okay, so what we're going to be going through here is these are just going to be some visuals to kind of keep us all on the same page, but we are going to be actually doing some techniques and getting you to practice some of these things as well. So if you are on camera, feel free to stay on camera. If you want to be off camera to do some of these techniques, then, you know, by all means, I'll be doing them with you. So to get started, I always like to make sure that our events are as interactive as possible, because everybody's going to have a different level of presentation skills, what you're comfortable with doing versus some things that we can enhance. So I highly welcome you to visit slido.com and enter the code 19799, and you can actually ask your questions there. We'll try to monitor the chat function as well on Zoom, but I got my trusty secondary monitor off to the side so that as questions come up on Slido, we'll be able to actually answer them most likely in real time, especially if we get a lot of the same ones. Okay, and we'll also show you this, this code at the end as well. So what we're going to be learning today is a little bit about ourselves, our message, and our audience. And when I was facilitating this presentation just last time, so not that long ago, when we used the word talk so they listen, I had a very astute individual put their hand up and say, well, don't you mean that it's supposed to be the audience before our message? And that's absolutely true. But for us to be able to have the external awareness that we need to truly understand our audience, we need to be able to have some sort of internal awareness, which is going to address some of our biases and some of the baggage that we often bring into our day, or that we actually bring into our presentations with us. Some of those things actually manifest themselves into tics and tells. And what that does, and we'll get into it in further detail, is an indication to the audience that either you're not fully engaged or you're very nervous. So we'll touch on some things to be able to address that. Now, your message. Obviously, what we're communicating is as important as how we are communicating. So we're going to be using the word intention a lot, and that's the why behind the words. We'll also delve into the general design of how you can craft your message to make sure it's delivered in an authentic way. And the last one here is going to be your audience. So who's who, and then how we use our spatial awareness to make sure that everybody is remaining engaged. And if we have time at the end, what I'd like to do is touch on some of the new virtual perspectives that we've had to layer into our presentation skills world. So what I want you to do is just take a few moments and think to yourself what you think a good presenter is. Is it how they communicate? Is it their message? Is it their comedic aspect to it? Think very specifically about what makes that key presenter to you so good. And now I want you to think about that one attribute and ask yourself, is that something that I'm doing in my presentations? And oftentimes people will say, well, Chloe, that's great. I think Oprah's an amazing presenter. I think Brene Brown is an amazing presenter, but I can't present like that. There's this disconnect between the idea of understanding what a good presenter is and us being able to actually deliver on that. And the one key thing that many people across the entire world have said why they can't deliver on this is they see red. And here comes their fear monster. And their fear monster is big. And their fear monster is so ingrained in them that we actually can forget what we are going to say. We start to have a visceral response where we start to shake, our mouth goes dry. That's a big one, right? We lose our breath. Fear often takes hold, and if there's quite a few studies that say one of the #1 fears in the world is the fear of public speaking. Now, luckily for everybody on the call, we've all been on our presentation skills journey since before we could talk. We have been trying to communicate since we were babies. We had a very specific intention. And if the individual wasn't receiving that intention, giving us what we wanted, we would adjust to make sure that we were understood. We had no fear. So our presentation skills, if we can just kind of tell our fear monster to take a hike, trust me, this is going to be one of the best ways to improve presentation skills. And honestly, that's easier said than done. And I oftentimes will just say something along the lines of, well, practice makes perfect, but that's really not the case. There's no such thing as ultimate perfection. But what we can do is train ourselves to not be fearful. And one of the best ways that I do that is to make sure that we're staying in the moment. And how we do that, to begin with right off the bat, is we're going to do an exercise around breathing. Now, for us to actually pass air through our vocal cords to make a sound, we need air. And oftentimes, adults, I'll be honest, are terrible breathers. We're always sucking it in, or we're breathing with our shoulders like this. And we're not actually taking large breaths from our diaphragm to be able to project and even change the timbre and tone of our voice. So what I'd like you to do right now is let's take 30 seconds or less. And I want you, this is a breathing exercise that I do before every presentation, as I did today as well. What I'd like you to do is take a big deep breath in, fill up your belly. And as we breathe out, I want you to breathe out and hold. And then breathe out a little bit more air and hold. And breathe out all of the last air, push it all the way out. And I want you to do that one more time. We're breathing all the way in. Make sure that your diaphragm is extended. And you're gonna breathe out and hold. And breathe out, and hold, and breathe out. Push everything out, okay? For anybody that feels lightheaded, please sit down. But what this exercise does is actually reconnects you to your breath. And for those yoga enthusiasts, we always say breath is life. So already I feel, not that I was stressed to begin with, but that is a great way to try to de-stress yourself. And I highly recommend that you practice that breathing exercise, not just right before the presentation, but actually when you're doing your prep routines, which can be days, weeks, or months in advance, depending on how long you need to prepare for a specific type of presentation. Okay, biases. This is such a good one. So every time that we go into a presentation, we tend to bring some kind of bias or baggage with us. That could just be, let's say, a satisficing bias where our past presentations have been terrible, so we're just assuming that this presentation is going to be terrible. Or maybe, you know, the audience is a whole bunch of suits. They're just, you know, and you're thinking that this is going to be a dry, stuffy audience and they're not going to be engaged. Therefore, your engagement has dropped. So it's the Harvard Business Review actually breaks down our awareness into 2 factors that directly relate to our biases. And one is our internal awareness of ourselves, which allows us to understand our thoughts and our feelings. And the flip side of that is our external awareness, which allows us to not project ourselves on others, but understand the different behaviors that you're receiving from them so that we can sometimes adjust. And that comes in handy when you're presenting. And even in the virtual age where we tend to be presenting to 18 muted microphones or 18 different blank screens, it's really important to recognize if we are bringing any of that negativity potentially or assumptions into our presentation skills. One of the biggest assumptions that a lot of individuals, when we're doing this, whether at the executive level or even at the student level, is they automatically assume the audience is against them. When they walk up, they're like, oh, the audience wants me to fail. And this is one of the biggest news flashes that you'll ever receive in presentation skills. You ready? The audience wants you to succeed. What? I'm being honest here, okay? The audience legitimately wants you to succeed, okay? There might be that one bad actor that's going to be there heckling you from the back, but there are methods to handle those people in a respectful way. But the audience, like I said, they want you to succeed. So if you happen to forget a line, or you happen to not have the most energy that day, that's okay, because secretly in their minds, they're going, okay, great, this person can do this, okay? And again, if we go back to what our fear monster has told us, that presenting in public can be absolutely terrifying, I guarantee you the people that are sitting in the audience are so thankful that they are not the ones that are standing up there and presenting. So us just knowing that, please let that give you a little bit more strength and a little bit more power for your presentation skills. Because as soon as we start to give away that power, we start to develop tics and tells. I'm sure everyone here has been in a group presentation and has seen somebody that is up there presenting lean on the whiteboard or start leaning on stuff, right? Or has anybody seen a press conference or maybe anybody present and they start to shift their weight from foot to foot? You would be surprised how much, we call that dancing, but you would be surprised how many people are not grounded when they give a presentation. What that is an indicator for the audience is that you're not 100% paying attention. Therefore, why should the audience pay attention? And then it just becomes this kind of cyclical spiraling of no one's paying attention to your presentation. So when you are presenting, very important to be very grounded, okay? Plant your feet. And if you do notice when you are practicing, or if you film yourself and then you review it afterwards, that you are shifting your weight, ask yourself why you're doing that. And oftentimes it comes down to you're uncomfortable, okay? People are messing with their clothes or their hair, right? It's very, very important that when we are practicing our presentation skills, that we film ourselves and we listen to ourselves, as hard as that is, okay? Sit down with a friend if you can. That's always a great one. My family and friends love to review my presentations after the fact. And you know what? Is challenging as it is for everyone, it's still challenging for me sometimes to sit through that, because we do notice things that we want to improve upon. So another technique I'll share with you. When you do watch yourself and listen to yourself, get comfortable with how your voice sounds. It's often going to sound very different recorded than it is when you hear it coming out of your mouth. So every time that you're watching yourself, try to pick up on one tick, one tell, whether it's, again, adjusting your clothes or you're dancing and you shouldn't be dancing. And then when you go to do that presentation again, just try to address that one thing. Don't try to do everything, okay? And what you can do with this technique is, as you continue to practice and you start to get rid of some of these negative behaviors, you'll be able to layer on other ones. So let's say you had a total of 5 things you wanted to fix. It could take maybe 30, 40 times to get rid of some of those things. Jot them down so that before you go to present again, hopefully you'll be able to at least be aware of some of these things. It is crucial that we are aware of it as individuals, presenters, because again, if we're giving away our power to the audience, another way of doing that is being fearful that they're going to have a negative comment about our presentation or a negative comment about how we look. So by us reviewing our own presentations, I already know what I look like and I know what I sound like. So if someone is, coming in and saying something negative, I will already have likely tried to address it. Therefore, their comments have little power. So again, just some ways that we can, really make sure that we're being our best presenter selves. Moving on, because I want to make sure that we're very mindful of everyone's time today, to script or not to script. So this comes down to messaging. And this is a question that I often get is, when we are trying to be our authentic selves, should I have a memorized script? And the answer is it depends. If you're on stage and your director is shouting at you to know your lines, then you should probably know your lines. But when it comes to, reading off, your quarterly marketing results, or, you're just in a presentation amongst your colleagues. Rarely would you need a formal script. What you do need is going to be bullet points. You want to make sure that you have your high level points. And this doesn't sound, I know this is not rocket science, but you'd be surprised at how many people, when they go to present, their fear monster takes over and they forget exactly what they're going to say. Even if they are experts in their field. Even me, I have all my notes jotted down right in front of me, just in case my little fear monster, who I've parked over in the corner, decides to come and join us today. He's not invited, don't worry. So once you have those bullet points, it's a lot easier to kind of craft your narrative and your story around that. And the most simplistic way to describe a solid presentation is tell the audience what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. Again, doesn't sound complicated, but when you are crafting your narrative, absolutely make sure that you have some of these key points kind of jotted down, and then your subpoints on top of that. And that can take practice, because there are many different types of individuals write scripts or write speeches or write a presentation deck, whatever the case may be. If you're using PowerPoint, they attack the problem or the opportunity differently. Some people just like to write a lot of information down, journal style, and then synthesize that. Other people are just very concise and they're like, boom, quarterly numbers, done. If you start to practice how you start to script, then you're going to develop your own style with this. So if it's more comfortable for you to actually have something memorized, then try it. Try it in a presentation. And if it doesn't work well, make sure that you're assessing what you think went wrong in the presentation, and then try to shift that a little bit. And there's actually an interesting study. It was from the National Social Anxiety Department out of San Francisco. And they said that one of the largest contributing factors to an individual losing their lines during a presentation or forgetting everything that they're saying is because they've attempted to memorize it. Therefore, they've conditioned their brain to believe there's only one correct way of delivering the presentation. And for a lot of people, that's actually going to create more anxiety. So if you've ever forgotten your lines on stage, it's terrifying, absolutely terrifying, right? Luckily, there's a few ways to get out of that, okay? And you can use this in your presentations too. If you're in a group presentation and you forget what you're saying, hopefully someone in your group is paying attention and they'll be able to jump in and prompt you. So if you're talking about your marketing report or your quarterly marketing numbers and you immediately forget what you're saying, hopefully someone will jump in and say, oh, Jane, why don't you share with the group around what our marketing numbers are for this quarter? Sounds simple. But as a group member, you too can actually help your team members if you ever encounter the situation. Now, if you're a solo presenter and you forget what you're saying, don't panic. There's a great way with your notes, hopefully, that you've written to keep you on track. And honestly, if you are in kind of a more intimate group or you're doing a facilitation where there's going to be back and forth dialogue, what you can actually do is be honest with your audience and go, oh, I lost my train of thought. Where were we? And usually someone in the audience is like, we're talking about marketing numbers or whatever the case may be. I guarantee you though, that pause that you're going to take, where there's that silence, the audience does not feel that epic gap like you do, okay? That moment can feel like eons when you're standing up there. To your audience, they barely notice it, okay? You can also stop and have a sip of water to regain your thoughts. That's completely fine. So another technique when it comes to not only script writing, but how you're presenting as well, is get used to silence. No, we should all be used to science. Get used to silence, because you can use it as a tool to impact what you're saying. You do the Shatner approach, right? Or, again, if you are going to use that silence, just be aware that it's very much experienced differently by your audience members, okay? So don't be afraid of having those little moments in there where you just kind of let the air hang, okay? It can be a very good technique. Another great way that we kind of touched on in regards to speech writing is have a trusted advisor. So you want to be able to have an individual that is going to give you clear and honest feedback around, does what you're saying make any sense? And when we write our own speeches or scripts, sometimes we're like, I know exactly what I meant. Unfortunately, not everybody is in our brain rattling around. So we need to be able to clearly communicate that for our audience. And your trusted advisor is going to be able to hopefully ask questions, not only during when they're just reading your script, but when you are presenting it in front of them. If they don't understand something immediately, they should be like, wait, what do you mean by that? And if you get used to someone actually interrupting what you're saying and then you having to immediately explain yourself, you would be surprised at how synthesized and concise your speech writing is going to become. Okay, I highly recommend trying it. Try not to do it maybe with somebody that really likes to heckle people too much, but it's supposed to be a very cathartic experience, just to be able to honestly have to stand there and really explain what you were trying to say. Okay, so explaining what you're trying to say to your audience. And the audience is key. And even in a virtual environment where we might not get to see everybody's beautiful faces, you need to know what the intention of your audience actually is. So sometimes we have the opportunity to know who's in our audience. Sometimes we know our executives are going to be there. Maybe your boss is sitting there. Maybe you're presenting to students. Maybe you're presenting to colleagues. And it really comes down to why those individuals are there. So for example, for today's call, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting everybody on the call, but I would assume that the intention of everyone here is to either have a little refresher around presentation skills or a little bit of professional development. By me knowing that, I can kind of reclaim a little bit of that power and not be fearful about necessarily going off topic or saying something wrong. Now, just as we can get off topic, your audience can actually get off track too. And, you know, let's all think back to a presentation that we had where one audience member tries to steal focus. We've all had that. Or maybe there's an audience member that's being unruly. We've had that too. And that can be extremely challenging for a presenter if your audience is not paying attention. Now, oftentimes, a few audience members at least will be considered active listeners. And that's usually where if you're watching a presentation, so you see the presenter and then you see the audience, you'll actually see that presenter connect and make direct eye contact, hopefully with everybody, but specifically with those active listeners, because there's actually two-way communication happening there. The active listener is saying, hey, I'm interested in what you're saying. I'm giving you physical cues by nodding or giving you weird looks that have no idea what you're saying. But that individual is actually providing two-way communication. And that is crucial for a presenter to be able to have. Again, in this digital world, we don't always have that luxury, but even if you're not receiving that two-way feedback, in your mind's eye, kind of assume that you are, okay? Just assume that you are, because again, if we're operating under the assumption that the audience is not there to judge us, they're there to join us on this journey, it's going to make presenting a little bit easier for us, okay? Now, I often get asked, you know, what happens if your boss is in the audience? Should I change what I'm saying? Should I present in a different way? Should I address that my executive is in the audience? And the answer, in my opinion, is no. You should already be presenting your authentic self, and also take to heart that your boss is probably there to support you and not try to cut you down, hopefully. So if your boss is there with you, you can absolutely make eye contact with them and go thank them for attending after the presentation. But a lot of people feel, again, that they have to almost be more professional or put on some different guise or whatever. But again, if your intentions are clear and authentic, and again, the reason behind the words, then it doesn't matter who's sitting in your audience, if it's the prime minister or it's your grandmother. Again, your authentic self is always going to shine through. Now, it's okay to have a little bit of reverence or fear if you are presenting to an audience of individuals that you would consider very high level. So it's, you know, if you had to do a huge panel in front of 10 of your top executives, absolutely you could be a little fearful. I understand that completely. I've been there too. But what you need to understand is that there are people too, and the premise around they're happy they're not up there presenting probably still stands true. So once we start to layer on these different narratives, we're going to become a lot more confident in our abilities to present. Now, spatial awareness. This is a good one. Have you ever been in a presentation where the presenter all of a sudden like steps away from the podium and the audience is like, oh, are they allowed to do that? I'm surprised they're not glued to their podium. Or, you know, the presenter grabs the microphone and starts to walk around and the audience is like, oh, this is new. This is exciting. Well, that's a presentation technique, to be able to move around the space in a comfortable way to engage with your audience. And I often get asked, well, Chloe, what happens if my audience is disengaged and I'm standing at the podium? Just like I said, walk away from take your microphone and say, I'm gonna, you know, go and you know, just mingle into the audience when it's appropriate. Okay, sometimes it's not. If you're in auditorium kind of style seating, it can be a little bit of a challenge if you jump down off stage and walk into the audience, but I've seen it done, and I've seen it done successfully. Now, if you're in a facilitation as well, it's a little bit easier to be able to walk around the room. But what's really, really important, and this is a very important technique as well, is that if you are going to decide to move anywhere within that space, make sure you know the space. Okay, so before you actually present, I mean, back in the day when we could go into the workplaces and present, or go into auditoriums and present, you want to make sure that you have walked the entire space, because you want to make sure that you understand and you know exactly where the audience would have a difficult time hearing or seeing you. And more importantly, that there aren't any hazards around that you're going to trip over. My least favorite is when they do like a 4-inch riser and then you stand on that. I have seen so many people trip and fall off of that riser, and then they have to put in like that little stair, and then you're tripping up. It's terrible. So just make sure that you are very conscious of the space, and practice, honestly, if you do have a riser or a podium, practice getting on and off of it. Sometimes podiums can be a little wobbly. Sometimes there's cords in the way. So make sure you understand for your safety and the safety of your audience as well. There was one time, speaking of someone falling off a riser, it was a very formal presentation. You know, there was like 200 people there, tables of 8, very formal dinner. And the individual who was the honored guest was actually, and they were a little bit elderly, they were in their like 70s. And everybody was so careful not like to make sure that they were getting up on the riser and getting off of the riser just fine. So the individual actually got off the riser just fine, but the 2 other stagehands actually tripped and fell. And unfortunately, that really stole focus from the rest of the presentation. But again, crucial to make sure that you're aware of your space from a safety perspective. The other thing about your space is, now that we're in a virtual world, is not only what's behind us, but what's off camera, to be able to help support you in your space, okay? So it's always good to make sure that you have everything you need, literally right either off camera or on your podium or on your desk, whether it's a Kleenex or a glass of water or your PowerPoint clicker or your cell phones, your timer, a fan, your notes, whatever the case may be. Really, really crucial to have that stuff set up before you actually present. It can be quite awkward to bring it with you onto the stage. Luckily, in our virtual world, we are very, very fortunate that we have off camera and on camera. So in my little studio here, there's many artifacts around me to keep me encouraged and keep me focused and keep everybody on track. So as you continue on your presentation skills journey, you will be able to understand and work with different items that are going to make you feel secure as a presenter. Okay. I've seen people take like a ribbon that like their child gave them, and they kind of keep that in their pocket if that's a way to kind of keep your fear monster at bay. But the more you practice, the more you're going to be able to understand what it is that you need to be able to jump right into a presentation. So with that, let's see here. Okay, presentation didn't go well. What do? It's a tough one. Do not beat yourself up about a bad presentation, okay? We have all had them. Like, all of us have had a bad presentation or been witness to a bad presentation. There was I want to call it an epic fail presentation, but they were students, so I'll let them, you know, it's an opportunity to learn. But I was adjudicating a case competition, national case competition, and there was this very energetic group. They looked very professional. They walked on stage. They were good to go. And there was this one gentleman who you could tell that the group had put a lot of stock in. That this was the guy that was like, you know, I'm going to be the best presenter. To the point where his overconfidence showed that right before his presentation, he actually pulled out his phone, checked his phone, laughed, and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, this person in the presentation, right when they were supposed to give their big address, they forgot all of their lines. Now, my heart went out to this person, even in his overconfidence, because it is still extreme. We want the person to succeed, but it was such an epic fail because the rest of the group had put so much confidence in this person that they didn't even know what his lines were. They had a coach in the audience that didn't even know what their lines were. So what they had to do was actually someone had to pull up their computer to get their notes because they had nothing printed. And then they had to go through the rest of the presentation. Now, in this specific example, it was a timed and adjudicated presentation, so it did go well. But we were able to provide some feedback to these individuals. And it's good advice for everybody is if you're a group, practice as a group, have everybody understand the content to the point where at least you could jump in. The other thing too is, you know, being overconfident with anything. My parents always said you should always enter a situation with humility, right? Be humble when you go in, right? Because your audience, you want to be on the same level as your audience. We're all people, right? So we should treat everybody with respect. And it was that moment will definitely stay with me because we wish we knew his lines and we're like, here's your cue. But unfortunately, that was a learning lesson for them. And they're going to have to go through that, right? So if it doesn't go well, all you have to do is reassess. Go through it. If it's recorded, try to watch it with your stuffy or a blanket. I don't know, like make yourself comfortable to watch this. And then just be very clear and concise as to what went wrong and when it went wrong. Because oftentimes, if we lose our lines, which is one of the most common things, it didn't happen in that moment. It happened a few moments before. We either got distracted, our fear caught up with us, or I don't know, like the audience was unruly. I mean, it can be a multitude of things that can lead up to us bombing our presentation. So once you have the opportunity to reassess, I want you to forget about the bad presentation, okay? If you've honestly done the homework of going back and understanding why it went wrong, do not dwell on a bad presentation. Please do not dwell on it, okay? You are going to have many more presentations across your presentation skills journey, and not all of them are going to be perfect, and that's completely fine. So reassess in an honest, authentic manner, and then move on with your life. Okay, I hope that student is not dwelling on that presentation. He probably took a lot out of that, and hopefully his whole group did as well. Okay. So before we move into some of our techniques that I want to go over, when we keep saying the words authentic self, you know, I love this quote by Maya Angelou that, you know, I've learned that people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And that is absolutely crucial when it comes to presenting. Our intentions, in my opinion, should be to either educate or inspire the individuals that we're speaking to. Okay? Those are often what my intentions are, to inspire or to educate. So the way that I use my hands or the way that I use my voice to keep people engaged are all part of the narrative for me to achieve those intentions, to inspire or to educate. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not learning from you as we're going through this presentation. I absolutely am. And, you know, even as I do present on presentation skills, it's a case study in itself, which I always find very interesting for me when I go back and then I get to review it. So let your fear monster go, because it is not going to help you with your intentions, okay? And people often say, well, you know, that's easier said than done. And I completely understand that, but practice will definitely help you get through this, okay? Trust me on this one. So now we're gonna get into some techniques, and these are ones that I use on a daily basis. And for those that I've shared some of these techniques with before, you do have to somewhat suspend your disbelief, because what we need to do is, just like you would warm up an engine in a car, your voice is your engine, right? And when we wake up in the morning, we haven't actually used that muscle yet, whether it's our, you know, just between our lips or our tongue or our vocal cords or your diaphragm. So it's really important that you're able to work those muscles so that you don't become as tongue-tied in a meeting, and also so that you can develop more of a timbre or a lilt in your voice if that's what you're trying to achieve. So it was actually Julian Treasure. He did a TED Talk, I think it was 2015, and he inspired this part of this presentation. And what he liked to focus on, he gave it an acronym like HAIL, which was like honesty, authenticity, integrity, and love or something. And those were his intentions when he's presenting. But one of the most important things of even his TED Talk was that, admit this person, was that you need to make sure that your mouth is actually warmed up, okay? And I guarantee you that if you practice some of these movements, your presentation skills will absolutely become better, because your articulation is going to be better. We've all been in presentations where we've heard someone talk about this and you have no idea what they're saying, right? And sometimes it's our boss and we're like, what did you catch what they're saying? You know, it can happen to anybody. So the more we're able to actually, like I said, let's warm up this engine. So there's a few exercises, and I do them usually, I used to do them in my car before presentations because there's a lot of shouting involved. So it would just look like I was singing along to music. But one of the best ones is actually to do, if you've heard of this one called the siren before, I highly encourage you to not share this with your children because it's really irritating. But to warm up your voice, one of the best ways that singers and performers do this one is you want to start really low on your voice. So as low as you can go, you can hum it or you can say it out loud. So you want to go, and then you want to go all the way up to the top of your register. So it sounds like it. I'll demonstrate just because we have such a fantastic group today. So it would sound like, so again, please do not share this with children. It's very irritating. But what that does for you as presenters, my friends, is it's going to start to warm up all of your vocal register, which that directly translates into your ability to use a pitch to go higher or lower, and also allows you to have more of a breathy voice, and also allows you to actually direct more air from your diaphragm. So the siren is very helpful. Another one that is really good to be able to work your lips and your tongue is actually one that I share with everyone I know. It's called red leather, yellow leather. Now, I'm sure everybody's like, I could do this. This is really easy. So on muted microphones, I invite everyone to say the words red leather, yellow leather. And you want to repeat it. And you want to slowly get faster as you do, keeping very clear diction, okay? So it starts red, leather, yellow, leather, red, leather, yellow, leather, red, leather, yellow, leather, red, leather, yellow, leather. And you want to go as fast as you possibly can, maintaining very good diction. You're going to notice that you're going to get like a tickle on the edge of your tongue once you start to get very fast. And some of you might realize that it's actually harder than we thought it would be to be able to actually keep that cadence and go faster. This one is something that I use every single time. It might sound really weird to people that are outside of the performing arts, but again, the more you're able to get into the proper mental state as well as the proper physical state, All of these routines are going to be able to help you become your most authentic presenter self. So there's a multitude of other ones. I highly encourage people that if there's a tongue twister that you like to say, really articulate every single syllable as you do it, and you'll notice that it's going to start to work those mouth muscles for you. Okay? So we spoke a little bit about routines, and that's one of the last topics I want us to touch on today. Now, routines are crucial, not only for us to be able to memorize or understand what we're saying and get the message out, but also, again, to make sure that we're in the proper physical and mental headspace. So your routine for presenting, you will develop over time, but it should be something that's relatively consistent. So for example, 10 minutes before your presentation, you should be like ready to go, either sitting in the audience or in the waiting room of a Zoom meeting or whatever the case may be, and really prepping yourself. And one of the most amazing techniques was by Amy Cuddy. She is the social psychologist for the Harvard Business School. And in her routine, she demonstrates the amazing potential of power posing. So 2 minutes before your presentation, taking a confident stance, whether it's a Superman stance or you put your arms out wide, actually has a direct impact on your confidence level. So maybe adding something like that to your routine can be very helpful. I also want to stress the importance of making sure that you're nourished. So making sure that your mind is nourished so that you either, exercise that morning, or, you've done your yoga, or you've just done some good stretching to really warm up your body, especially if you're doing a presentation where there's going to be a lot of movement. And also making sure that you're fed and watered, okay? People often forget that something so simple can actually lead to you, people drinking water, absolutely, to you having the confidence to present. Because we have those physiological responses to our fear. There was actually a famous, I forget his name. He was a famous actor, not like Fred Astaire, but along those lines. And every time he was about to present, he would actually have to go and throw up. That was his routine. That seems to work for him. I don't recommend that. But the more you get to present, the more you're going to be adapting and figuring out what your routine is. And the more things you try, the more you're going to learn from that. And honestly, people don't wake up necessarily as fantastic presenters. Okay, you can't sleep on a presentation skills book and by osmosis get the information. Trust me, I have tried this. It does not work. So it's really important to use certain techniques so that you can stretch your skills so that when you're on stage, you're willing to take a few more risks. Okay, whether that's with your voice, or whether that's with your movement, or even with your scripting as well, okay? So I'm just gonna refer here to Slido. Let's see if we have, we have a question. Alicia, thank you. So it says, as a presenter, you are very familiar with your topic, but sometimes it feels like an individual can be rambling. What advice do you have to either slow down or focus? It's a fantastic question. It can happen to me oftentimes with a lot of my facilitation where my mouth is talking and then you realize you're talking and then you don't really know what you're saying. So best thing is practice. Really just understand, where your key points fall so that you can always loop back to that key point and just reiterate it for the audience. And hopefully that'll kind of click in for you that this is where you should be in your presentation. Another one is take a pause. If you're in a live presentation, you can actually look at your audience and say, are you still with me? To see if you can get them back on track with you. Refer to your notes is a great one. And I would say, feel free to take a little bit of a pause because again, that silence, if no one's paying attention, even us, we can feel like we're rambling. Sometimes that silence just gets everybody back on track. If you're in and that's honestly a fantastic technique, is that, if your audience is not engaged, just stop talking. You'd be surprised at how many people are going to be like, oh no, I'm supposed to be paying attention. Wait, what? And it's a fantastic way to, like I said, to get people back on the same page. So practice, use your notes, and don't be afraid to take a little bit of a silent pause when you need to. Okay, so very good question. Very good question. So kind of in summation of what we kind of spoke about today, I really wanted to make sure that everybody's been given, an opportunity to just go through some of the mental and physical techniques that you can use to try to be your best authentic presenter. And from my experience, being a good presenter really comes down to knowing yourself. I love it when people say it's about knowing your audience, and that is absolutely true, but it's really a challenge for us to relate to others if we don't have a good understanding of who we are, if we're not comfortable with ourselves. And again, it comes down to the fact of oftentimes in presentation skills, people feel like that they are being judged by the audience, and that's not the case whatsoever. So if we kind of change that negative internal narrative to something that is much more positive and encouraging, we set ourselves up for success to be able to actually present the material. Because your story is absolutely important, okay? You should absolutely be wanting to share what your message is, okay? And if you kind of think of your fear or your anxiety as that little fear monster where we saw that the screen went red, okay? You can like literally mentally put them into a little box and just have them somewhere. But do not let that fear take hold, because as soon as you do, that's when all those uncomfortable physiological responses can happen to that. Okay, so what we'll do is we have about 10 minutes left. I just want to pause here and see if we have any questions. I invite everyone to submit them on Slido if you do. You can also submit them in the chat function of Zoom in regards to any questions that you might have. Let's check some stuff here. Let's see. One of the other questions that I did recently get was in regards to individuals can sometimes present in a self-deprecating way. So in regards to, you're lending your power to somebody else. Women a lot of times tend to do this where we downplay our own expertise. And I don't want to necessarily get into the kind of, gender identity conversations around presentation skills, but the nutshell of that, of someone kind of not presenting their most powerful self, either comes down to practice, and oftentimes having that trusted advisor that's able to help coach you through different situations. So if you do find yourself, you are presenting in kind of that manner, that's okay. Like, it's definitely something that can be kind of shifted into something a little bit more positive, but remember, your story is absolutely worth telling. So, you definitely should be able to tell that. So for everyone on the call, I'm always happy to even do one-on-one conversations around presentation skills. If you or your teams or your staff, if you are interested in having more of these kind of workshops or facilitations, it can be adapted. I'm absolutely happy to come and facilitate those types of things. This is an excellent one. So on Slido, we had an individual, anonymous, said that, you talked about having something familiar near you to make you feel more comfortable, and one thing that helps them is printing a picture of one of their best friends or family members. I think that's fantastic. I still use that technique, and I'll be completely open and authentic with you guys. It's right here, and it's a note from my mom. I still use that, right? Because it's a way that we're able to just, like I said, bring our whole selves to work. So if you need to have a picture of your best friend or your cat, or you need to have a special figurine, or you need someone in the back of the audience helping you with time and doing that, I mean, by all means, that's absolutely good. Okay, so we have a question here. So it says, with someone that has to do a presentation and they're truly terrified, what would be the first thing you would share with them? I would ask them why they're scared. I would ask them why. What happened that made them so fearful of presenting? Oftentimes, it's like when people say that they're afraid of dogs, it's because there was like a tragic incident that happened in their childhood. That's why they're, forever afraid of animals. But usually it comes down to how they perceive themselves. they're just, like I said, they're letting that fear monster take hold, and maybe they haven't ever been in a successful presentation. It comes down, again, some people are just absolutely terrified to the point where they physically can't present. And there's actually some new technological developments in the virtual reality training that they've been able to actually use the full VR technology to have an individual slowly increase their audience participation. So for example, they'll start with in VR, virtual reality with like 4 people in front of them, and they get to present that way. And then the next step is presenting to a classroom size. And then the step after that is actually presenting to an auditorium. And for those individuals that actually are truly fearful, and it's almost a condition at that point, there are some great advancements in technology and in research that's been able to help them that way. So if your symptoms are not as severe as like an actual condition, then you can just start to practice slowly, practice in front of yourself, practice with some people that whether it's a few family members or a few friends, and just slowly build up like that, I think would be the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. And the other question too, I would say, is what would happen if you weren't afraid? Honestly, if you weren't afraid, how would you present? And just try to get them thinking on a more positive narrative would be good. Another question here. So if you are truly nervous, is there a way that you can picture the audience to make them not seem as scary? And there's the old adage of you can always picture your audience in their briefs or underwear. And I would say that for me, that's not a great way. But if it helps you, I mean, with respect for everybody as well, I think it's just, for me, it's better to just understand that the individuals you're speaking with are people. We're all people. And again, understand the assumption that they want to join you on this journey and not judge you is really something that's going to be able to help out. Okay, so one other question we received was around timing. Is not only like how do you wrap up a presentation, but what happens if you are running short on time? Is there a way that you can actually manage that? And one of the best ways is, understanding that if it is a timed presentation like we are in today, is making sure that you have, a watch nearby, or you have someone that's in the audience that's providing you with feedback as to, hey, you have 2 minutes left, or you have 1 minute left, can be quite helpful. And it's okay too that let's say there's a lot of questions that are making you run over time, that you can actually say, okay, we're going to take some of these questions offline. And if you do put your questions in the proverbial parking lot to address them at a later date, please make sure that you're actually addressing them with the audience members and not just kind of letting it go, because again, that speaks to your integrity and authenticity as well. So with that, we are just nearing time, and I'm happy that I'll be able to give you guys a couple more minutes back into your day. But I want to say thank you so much for taking this time to address a great topic that many people do on a daily basis, and hopefully you found some positives here in your professional development. And I highly encourage you to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Facebook, Twitter if you have to, I guess. Let me know if you guys do have any more follow-ups or questions that you have. Okay, so with that, I will let everybody go with a total of 4 minutes back in your day. And I want to thank the Langley Chamber of Commerce for hosting us today and allowing all of your fantastic members to be part of this facilitation. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Chloe.
Bye. Thanks.